Hi and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen. This is a show where we talk about various things to do with communication and media happening in and around Boston. And of course there's a lot of people working in Boston doing exactly that kind of work. Researchers, consultants, academics and students. And today and tonight, for a change, we've got two guests, and we're not going to talk about them, we're going to talk to them because they're millennials. So we're going to change the tone of our talk a little bit in terms of the way that we've tended to refer to millennials as people who are the other, those of us who are academics and are older. And so I'm delighted to have Bianca Dempsey and Andy Rondon here tonight, both of whom I know through my work at Boston College. So welcome, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can get to, or what point we can get to as we discuss this thing called millennials, which of course refers to people born between 1982 and 2004, which would include both of you, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a category that's pretty stable, I think, in the public imagination. Right? There's a sense in which young people, millennials, represent something of a problem. Yeah. And like young people everywhere, at every generation, young people represent a problem. And I think it's been particularly prominent as a challenge to think about how millennial people, or millennials, have become much more active and present in the world through media, at least in a different way. And social media is the most prominent way that millennials have a presence. And of course this is a problem for many people. So I wanted to talk to you about that and to get your views on how you use it and the kinds of things about your lives that kind of impact, or the kind of things that you think are important that are impacted specifically by media and by maybe social media, but other forms of media. So I guess the first question, Andy, is to you. How do you use it?
Specifically, how I use media is more of, the basics, how everybody uses it, just to interact with my friends at first, but more so also to interact with a larger audience and get their attention to, for example, social problems that may be around, such as police brutality and stuff like that of the like. A simple tweet can go a long way if you have the right following. So just keeping that in mind whenever I'm using my social media, that it's not just talking to a blank phone, for example, but to actually speak with people who have either similar ideas with you or want to engage in discussion with you all the time.
Right. Bianca?
I think I have similar views. I try and have a certain perspective when I'm using it, either if I'm using it for my own gain, which is, when I'm communicating with my friends or my family. I have a lot of family abroad, so being able to communicate with them in that manner really helps our relationships, which is good for me. I really enjoy it, and it's good to be able to talk to them. But on the same note, I do keep in mind the fact that what I'm posting is seen by people who I know and people I don't necessarily know, because social media is so open and engaged that you can be interacting with people that you don't know, and you want to be able to represent yourself in a good way and be able to say the things that you want to say and say what you mean so that other people know what you're talking about.
Which is pretty much the sense in which media has been used for generations by young people to negotiate and to navigate their way in the world and through the world. Would you both shaking in agreement?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, because the question is often raised that millennials really don't get it, because you've got your heads buried in your phones and you won't concentrate in the classroom and so on. Yeah. And what do you make of those kinds of criticisms?
Personally, I make those criticisms kind of blindsided, I want to say, just because it's a new era at the end of the day. You multitasking, for example, I can be texting one of my friends but also be texting one of my coworkers about changing a shift. Let's take it into a bigger aspect. I can be, for example, selling something on social media if I'm an entrepreneur, and also talking to my family, and also planning out the next trip that I have. Right. So it's getting inside of these different avenues that sometimes people don't really see it that way, but me being buried in my phone is kind of, all right, I have the ability now to have all these different tasks running at the same time. which for some people may seem a bit odd and voodoo-ish, to be quite honest.
Voodoo-ish in the way in which what?
Where
It's
it just
like
seems
a form of magic.
taboo, like
Oh, right.
taboo, because it wasn't really done. Like so many tasks happening at the same time wasn't really done in the past.
This has been a complaint that's been made, particularly about the impact of social media in classroom environments by Sherry Turkle at MIT. Not only multitasking, but the idea that, to be a little bit cruel about it, she would suggest that, well, you really can't learn anything because you're not concentrating on one thing.
Yeah.
And you're saying, well, in fact, the natural or happy place for you to be is where there's a number of different things you can be doing at the same time. Yeah?
Yeah. To counteract with that point, actually, a little bit, I feel that there are moments where you can do multitasks at the same time, but when you're learning in class, I do believe that is a space where it's completely different and you should focus on the task ahead of you.
Right.
Just because it's different for you, for example, to pull out your phone and do some side things while you're watching a football game, but in a classroom where it kind of urges you to be there 24/7,
Right.
it's a completely different playing field.
So that complicates it a bit, Bianca, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a very fine line, and there's a time and place for everything. So I would never sit in a classroom, or if I'm having a family dinner, I don't tend to pull out my phone and just start scrolling through my social media. I also think it's a very personal thing. I mean, some people can sit in a classroom and somehow maybe absorb a lecture and check their Facebook at the same time. I'm not one of those people, but if people can do it, they can. And a lot of the times I think if they are multitasking during class, it tends to show in different ways later on, either in their grades or how much they have to study at the end of it, because if you're not paying attention when it counts, then you can't make that up later.
So there's still very much a what we might think of, or what I might think of as, in your own view, a kind of traditional pedagogical perspective. That is, the idea of the single task being necessary to be achieved in order to learn, in order to engage. Where do you think the criticism originates with the older or the non-millennial generation of millennials? I mean, what are they worried about, you think?
I think they're worried that we don't have any social skills because all we do is sit there and stare at our phones whenever, we're in a lunch line, or if we're on the train commuting to work, everyone's just standing there on their phones, no one talks to each other. But I don't know if I necessarily agree with that because, like I said before, there's a time and place for everything. So when I am with my friends, I try to be as present as possible with them so that it's not time wasted or time that I feel like, I guess I want to be with people who make me not want to look at my phone because that means that I'm enjoying my time and I'm having good conversations. But if I'm looking at my phone the entire time, that probably shows I'm not hanging out with anyone that I really should be spending more time with.
Yeah, and to add on to that point, I feel that a lot of parents, for example, will say that because a lot of times children will use their phone as a distraction from what their parents are telling them to avoid the discussion that they're having with their parents. Because if your parent is constantly nagging at you or something like that, you as a self-defense mechanism will be, okay, well, I'm just going to pull out my phone. And you can definitely escape from that moment right there.
Right.
So I feel that's where that kind of stems from, the fact that they can just completely move the parent and say, well, I don't really have to talk with you right now because I can talk to my friend.
Right. And I think that raises a very interesting question, Andy, about the way that the incredible level of engagement of social media enhances the capacity of young people to maintain their own interests, to step aside from authority, as it were, and to create the sort of integrity around relationships.
Yeah.
Certainly that seems to me to be a valuable aspect of what social media offers, which maybe, to take your point, Bianca, families don't necessarily like to think of children leaving them. And in a sense, social media makes it possible for that departure to happen very quickly, very early, and very soon. Of course, much of this has been much of these kinds of points have been discussed around the concept of the moral panic, which is where, with every new media form, certainly since the 18th and 19th century, maybe even before that, with the printing press, there's a sense in which things are changing dramatically. People have access, the public, the citizenry have access to information that was previously held up or contained or managed by authorities. Do you feel that this particular moment, at least for you as millennials, represents a new opportunity to have more access or new access to new knowledge and new possibilities?
Definitely. I think I can pull out my phone and look up just about anything I want whenever I want, and knowledge is just there at your fingertips, and it's there for you to access. I mean, I can look up anything and learn something new every day if I want to.
Yeah, it's also, I feel that it seems so powerful that a lot of people take it for granted, though, just because I know, for example, a lot of people who don't fully know how to use their iPhone or whatever phone that they want to use. But as soon as you have this phone that can have a calculator, have the whole internet inside of it, have different apps and all of stuff like that, you can even FaceTime while you're talking with your family. So, there are a lot of things that people take for granted and just say, well, I just kind of use it, so.
But going back to the point that you were making earlier, there's also this capacity to engage in quite active social production. Positive aspects around the pursuit of justice or the organisation of protest or revolt, all those kinds of things are also equally handy and equally amenable, if you like. I put this here as a prop, just through this little thing. I've also got an iPad, but just through these little things. And that seems to me to be a major shift that really happened, has happened more recently at least, but it's happened as you as a generation have sort of suffered the opprobrium and the accusations from older generations. What do you make of the opportunity to both complain? I mean, Google has often on its pages has complain to Google. This idea that people can complain more, that they can be more active in their interactions, and that there are people who are waiting for those complaints to respond to them. And then there's continuum, not only of that level of corporate sort of acceptance of complaints made available through the internet, but then escalating right across the continuum to being able to organise, to take political action, to move, in the interests of social justice or in the interests of anybody who's oppressed. That seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, but that seems to me to be a particularly strong force that adds something unique to social media.
I think that the complaint aspect and stuff like that is the constructive criticism. Again, people like Google will probably have to dig through all of the stuff that people are saying and try and implement new things, because Google being so big, it can't stay stagnant. That's another part of this new era that we're in, where you can't do one thing, because if not, you're yesterday's news. And I feel that that's the ever process of always moving in this new era, because if you're doing one thing, for example, how long was the beeper even a thing? Like the beeper that
What's
you
the
had,
beeper?
The little mobile thing.
I know. I'm messing with you.
No, just say.
But doctors still wear beepers, don't they? I've seen them at the hospital.
Yeah,
right?
they do.
But
I don't. I'm pretty hip to it.
But just think about how long the beeper was even popular.
Yeah, that's right.
It didn't last that long.
No.
And that's because it wasn't constantly moving. The only reason why these phones, for example, that we have are lasting so long is because you're getting software updates every other week.
Yeah, tell me about it.
You're getting features every other year. So when you're constantly changing and doing stuff like that, you're rooting yourself into this system and saying, okay, well, I'm part of this era because I'm moving with it.
Right.
So, that's something very key to this era, the fact that if you're not moving, then you're yesterday.
Okay, but let's put our critical thinking caps on here and recognise that from the political economy aspect, we're also being fully incorporated into that incredible wave of innovation, of change, and in a sense, it's like being caught in a tide. How do you find a place where you can say, well, maybe I don't want to be in that place. Maybe I don't want to be swept along. Maybe I would rather be yesterday's news or in another location. It seems to me that there's a really serious number of political economy questions to ask about what corporations want us to do.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Bianca?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult place to be in, to be one of the people who says, I'm going to step back from this and, maybe not purchase a smartphone and stick with the old-fashioned flip phones, because it's a way to stay more present. If it's not right there in front of you, then you can't use it. So I think that's one reason that people do stay away from smartphones, is to stay more present. But at the same time, that puts you in a difficult position, because so much is happening on smartphones and through smartphones that if you don't have it, it can be difficult to keep up with daily life. I've found, like, I went to get ice cream once, and they wouldn't take gift cards anymore. You could only use the app to use the gift card.
Right.
So if you don't have a smartphone, well, then no gift card for you. Yeah. So it makes life a little bit difficult. And even, at colleges, now they do sporting tickets through the iPhone. So to scan into the games, you have to use your iPhone app to get into it. And if you don't have an iPhone, it's a lot more difficult to get into the game and just go through daily life, I think.
So it's a real question of the determination, the way of life being determined by what's captured in here, and we won't even talk about the surveillance capacity of. Does that bother you? That corporations and the government, but corporations in particular, can gather so much information about you? If something new comes out, Andy, you sign up, and then next week something new comes out, and you sign up. And you're giving up all this information about yourself. I'm not accusing you personally.
Yeah, I know.
You can tell me later. But does that bother you, or is that also a sort of millennial thing to be maybe less concerned about?
It bothers me personally a lot. For example, I have a sticky note on my camera on my laptop just because I'm very suspicious and stuff like that. So I feel as if though that's a big concern of my own. They do give you countermeasures for it, but it's not highlighted. Like, for example, you can go into your settings and change a bunch of stuff. Like for your phone, many times they have location services, and unless you explicitly turn that off in settings, you will be followed all the time. And you can pull out your phone and look at it right now, and you will see all the locations you've been at in the past week, minute by minute. And that's really scary if you don't know it's happening and if you care about it. Because there are also a lot of people who are just, well, I don't do anything that's bad or anything like that, so I don't care.
Doesn't matter if I'm surveilled.
But for me, it's more of the aspect of, well, I feel that there's a boundary of where my privacy starts, and you cross that a long time ago. So yeah, that's always been a kind of concern for me when it comes to technology and how it's advancing so quickly.
Yeah. Bianca, do you have a sense of where millennials are at with this kind of thing as well?
I think that in terms of the surveillance, like you were talking about, I can see the benefits to it in some instances. I mean, there's so much going on in this world right now where it is helpful to be able to track someone if you need to, but at the same time, I see where the whole privacy thing, like, I don't necessarily feel comfortable with someone monitoring my every step either, but I guess that's sort of the question is, am I willing to sort of give up that little bit of personal privacy for some type of greater good if something were to happen? And I think that's something everyone has to decide for themselves.
Sure. What about the sense of the sort of hyper-capitalist environment that we're in, that so much of what takes place on social media or what's on the internet is really driven by commerce, is driven by your ability or everybody's ability to be a shopper, to be a consumer, and the kind of hyper power of consumer capitalism is really something that's remarkable. and overpowering. And it, as you were suggesting, Andy, it's hard to actually turn these things off.
Yeah.
They're there, they're built into the system, the algorithms are there. We've talked about that on previous BMT shows. What can you do? Are we just captives? I mean, what's the view of capitalism from within the millennial headspace?
I feel as if though that too, I feel like there should be a respected limit to it, where, for example, I recall in the previous year, Twitter didn't have ads. As of late, Twitter introduced ads. And previously, Twitter had ads where it was personal tweets which had gone about, but now it's evolved where at the beginning of your own video, they will add an ad for it if it has enough likes, enough retweets, enough replies on it. So it really makes me wonder, as in for, well, can I just enjoy this without you inputting your business in my face, or does everything have to become this almighty dollar pursuit? And I feel that a lot of corporations don't really care that much about it because, you know, every penny counts in their eyes. So I would personally say it affects me, but I don't think that they'll care much to change it.
Well, certainly where there's a very large amount of money involved
Yeah.
in the companies that are successful, why would they change? And again, you know, going back to the questions of how algorithms determine so much of what we experience, you know, through personalisation, through being able to identify our preferences, and then keep sending us stuff even though we don't want it. You know, the Amazon book that you buy once, you find you're getting advertised for books by the same author over and over every time you go on that site. Same thing happens with interests you might have, political interests on Facebook and so on. So this seems to me to be putting millennials in a position where potentially there's less power. But in another sense, I don't really think that that's the case.
Yeah, I think it's a narrow-minded approach to just look at what someone bought once and then send them advertisements for things that are similar to it. Because if you're only getting ads for things that are similar to what you've already bought, you're not really opening your eyes to other avenues or other products to explore, because all you're getting in your feed is the same stuff you've always known, be it, you know, a vacation trip or a book or any politician that you follow. You just end up getting a one-sided view of pretty much everything.
Right. Nancy Boehm, who we've had on this show a long time ago, suggested that, you know, one of the features of social media and media more generally in the digital era was what's called relationship management. In other words, why do we use Facebook and why do we use Snapchat and so on? And to a large extent, it's to help us manage and interact with people who we feel an affection with. But what seems to me to be important is the intensification, as we might say in media studies, of the relationships. And that while this sort of negative view of millennials comes from above, there's also this sense that you have much more ongoing and intense and rich relationships with your friends. Does that seem like a reasonable summary of where you're at in terms of that relationship management?
Yeah, I don't think I'm any more or less involved in relationships than anyone older than me or younger than me. I think I try to do a good job of putting in time and effort to my relationships, but I don't necessarily think that my relationships are better because of social media. I mean, it depends on the situation. If I have, you know, long distance friends and family, then social media definitely helps. But in terms of the people that I surround myself with on a daily basis, I don't think my relationship with them is better because I follow them on Instagram or I get their Snapchats every day.
I think it just opens the avenue of relationships furthering, in my opinion, because, for example, I'm a hip-hop enthusiast. If I see, for example, if I follow somebody that I didn't really know in the past on Twitter, and then 3 weeks later, they retweet something from a big hip-hop page, and I like it, automatically that sparks a discussion. And I'm already in your DMs talking all like oh, like, did you see this? Oh, did you see this video? So I feel that you can bring that relationship to further when you actually see them in person through social media. And I think that that's something important that really has created for better relationships in the long run sometimes.
Right. And perhaps a different type of relationship where, you know, to go back to the moral panic question, the stories about young people who've killed themselves, some in Massachusetts, some in other parts of the world, for all sorts of crazy reasons, but often to do with their deep connection to the internet and to a lack of the capacity to step back from it and to understand what the nature of the relationship is.
Yeah.
The difference between in real life and virtual life is a challenge. What other things, just as we wind up, might be or come to mind, or might be, you know, significant or important to you, that maybe we could canvass at some other time, or that you think might be worth mentioning? Anything? Hip hop, of course, has been very important.
Yeah.
Right, in using the media tools.
Yeah, I was gonna say a little bit more about the whole hip hop aspect, because I feel as if though many people in that avenue don't understand the power that they have and the way that they influence a lot of the younger people in our country, and the way that, for example, you will portray, for example, hip hop nowadays, to go on a bit of a tangent, has become more of a drug user hip hop, which has been idealized, where back in the day it was, all right, well, this is entrepreneurial, you can put it into those quotes, hip hop, and people, the mindsets have changed. So for me, for example, I see that and I say, this generation, even though I'm part of this generation, doesn't understand the power that you have with just having simple lyrics put out there and having people chant it. So I feel that that's something that through social media, and because hip hop has become, in my opinion, less of a talent thing and more of a publicity thing, is a real issue.
Right. So by that you would mean a negative?
Yeah, I would say more of a negative. There are in my opinion, very few people in the hip hop industry that you can look up to and say, you know, the way that this person has crafted their career, I look up to and I want to follow into those footsteps.
Right. Bianca?
I think it's unfair for people to get so down on millennials for whatever reason it is, saying that, you know, we're sort of unaware of the world around us because we're so absorbed. I think, if anything, the general person or millennial is not more or less informed than anyone else. I think they have the capacity to become more informed, but at the same time, depending on what you're looking at, it can be real news, it can be fake news, who knows what you're looking at. So the things that are getting shared on Facebook or Twitter is available to everyone, and that doesn't stop at a certain generation. I mean, my parents have started getting into Facebook and all that. Even my grandparents are on Facebook now. So that stuff is there for everyone, and I think it's just a matter of learning how to use it the best to your advantage.
Okay, well, let's leave it there. I want to say thank you for that. Great that your grandparents are on Facebook. I think it's great using those tools. And thank you, Andy, for some insights into hip-hop.
No problem.
And thank you both for your contributions to this. So that's been Boston Media Theory for another episode. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep mediating. Good night.